Hi, I'm Jim Knotts, President and CEO of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund. Welcome to today's virtual reading of the names. 2022 marks the 40th anniversary of the dedication of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C. As part of our commemoration, we'll host an in-person reading of the names at the wall from November 7th through 10th, 2022, when all 58,281 names on the wall will be read aloud. In the lead up to that event, we'll be reading names each day online while sharing the photos of these heroes. For our daily virtual reading, the names of the service members will be read by month and day of death between the years 1956 and 1975 in alphabetical order for the given day. We apologize in advance for any mispronunciations. Know that our readers are doing their best to honor these service members. We hope you'll listen and watch each day and share with others as we remember and honor those who gave their lives during the Vietnam War.
John Wilburn Adams, Abraham Kaleli Ohuna, Ronnie Gilman Alcock, Winfred Alderman, Sammy Edward Alexander, David Alicia Serrano, Richard James Allen, Franklin Vance Anderson, Artis Wesley Anderson, Robert Warren Andrews Jr., William Novak Ari, Philip Fred Arnold, Felix Arroyo Sierra Jr., Arthur James Artcop, James Anthony Ashford, Albin Anton Baranchnik, Sammy A. Braga, Ralph Belisari, Robert Louis Bauer, Wayne Bennett, Kenneth Clay Barrier, Brent John Bursch, John Anthony Bifaretti Jr., Lyle Preston Bills, Dennis Liddell Black, Gerald Edward Blalock, Michael Lee Bloomfield, Sherman James Bulwer, Reginald Alonzo Bowman, Robert Ray Boyd, Michael L. Bragdigan, Freddie Isidore Branch, Paul Roger Browder, Wilmette Brown, Dale Frazier Brown, Christopher Bryant, Richard William Bullock, Robert Charles Burke, Walter L. Burrows, Benny Lee Butler, Randall James Cadenhead, Albert John Campstree, Terry Wayne Carpenter, Samuel David Carpenter, Loring William Carper Jr., Thomas Lee Christensen, Edward Orrin Clays, Earl Glenn Clark, William Walter Coiler, Michael Harry Corwin, Alan Wesley Courtney Jr., Paul Allen Cowan, David Austin Cox, Leon David Cox, Larry Anthony Searcy, David Rockwell Crocker Jr., Thomas Hiram Crook, Dennis Owen Cullum, Lonnie D. Cummins, Marvin Eugene Cutterer, Carl Richard Dagger, Raymond N. Dalbendike, James Norris Davis, Stanley Roy Davis,
Eugene Dawson, Robert Mario DeDominic, Lawrence D'Amelio, Tony Dedman, Donald Thorpe Deere, Edward Dietman, Louis Delgado Class, Harry Henry DeZormo, Paul Joseph DiCaprio, Ronald Wayne Dodge, Charles Robert Downey Jr., Rex Wayne Doyle, Kenneth Eugene Duncan, Danny David Dye, Dennis Earl Dyer, Charles Adrian Eakins, Jerry Arnold Eaton, Ronald Lee Eckert, George Ray Faithy Edwards, Felix Esperanzo Jr., Dennis Lee Everts, Jerry Lou Ewing, Larry Allen Faulkner, Walter Felton, Marcus Guy Feeblecorn, James Ronald Fields, Sherman Robert Fields Jr., Benny San Nicolas Flores, Chester Joseph C. Fontenot, Robert Lee Foster, Joseph O. Fergault, John Ralph Frongolo, Nash Fry, Gary Thomas Futrell, Alan Morgan Garrett, Herbert Lyman Gay, Wilson Truman Gerald, John Arthur Gibson IV, Jack Burt Gorton, Larry Grace, Alan Russell Green, John Joseph Geist, Richard Harold Hagman, Richard Allen Hathcox, Timothy McKee Hamilton, Edward Hamilton, Bernard Hamlet Jr., Jerry Wendell Hammock, Lloyd E. Hand Shoemaker Jr., Stephen Michael Haney-Oates, Johnny Harrison, Albert William Hawkins, Lynn Carroll Hayes, Harvey Norman Hedstrom, Raymond Albert Hensley, Roger Allen Hickok, Bernard Malcolm Himes, Lawrence Edward Hitchens, Claude Arthur Hodge, Gary William Hoagland, Richard Jerry Hornbeck, Frank Luther Huddleston, Gerald Don Huffman, Thomas Stephen Hughes,
James Albert Hull, Jr., Reed Allen Eiler, Sterling Henry Johnson, James Bruce Johnson, Sr., David Francis Johnson, Charles W. Johnston, Jr., Benny Ray Jones, Jimmy Dale Jordan, William F. Julius III, Eddie Kelly, Jr., Henry James Keith, James Donald Kluge, Michael Darrell Cousy, James Lathan, Gerald Thomas LeBlanc, Nate Francis Lee, Charlie Gray Lewis, Arthur Eugene Lewis, Douglas Edward Lohmeyer, Louis Robert Lordy, Ronnie Dean Luman, Philip Leslie McLeod, Cyril Hyman Madison, John Joseph Magurosi, Frederick Charles Manget, Paul John Marson, Roland Trent Marshall, Alan David Martin, Samuel Calvin Martin, Michael B. Malden, Richard Earl May, Picardo Ramonzi Mays, Joseph McCants, Jr., Charles Ernest McMullen, Franklin H. Metzger, Lowell Wayne Meyer, James Richard Michael, Philip Dennis Miller, Rochester Mitchell, Charles Merlin Moe, Jr., Richard Lynn Moore, Gilbert Gregory Mullen, Daniel Harold Muniz, Mario Fowler Muse, Jr., Edward George Myers, Harold Bradley Nadeau, Jasper Newton Newberry, Jr., John Alvey Nicholas, Victor Hubert O'Neill, Ronald Earl Pace, Robert Louis Padilla, Gilbert Wayne Page, Edward Arthur Payne, Walter Palmer, Jerome Paris, Jr., Richard Michael Patrick, Larry Pauley, Dale Allen Pierce, Charles Harold Perkins, Roy Andrew Petty, Jr., Kenneth Walter Pickett, Dale L. Posey, Robert Allen Potter, Joseph David Prince, Jr.,
Stephen Wayne Quinn, Thomas Henry Ralph, Jr., John Peters Randalls, Charles David Raber, Don Allen Redfearn, Martin Daniel Riley, Charles Edward Reiner, Arthur Reynolds, Jr., Dennis Henry Wren, Clifford G. Rhodes, Lawrence L. Ringgold, Jr., Larry Lee Robinson, Robert John Rosar, Rafael Sanchez Saliva, John Elwood Sheets, David Leroy Shettle, Richard Herman Schmidt, Francis Baron Schmidt, George Clifton Schultz, Jr., Victor John Schweig, William Robert Sessions, Andrew Jonah Short III, Terrence Edward Simon, Wilbur Arnold Scar, Wendell Lee Slavens, Quentin Edward Slocum, Jr., John Charles Smith, David Walter Smith, Billy Eugene Snipes, Frederick Don Snyder, David Pecor Soyland, Richard Eugene Staub, Vincent James Stamato, Jr., James Rowe Stevens, Virgil Grant Stewart, Bobby Dale Swindell, John Walter Teague, George Thomas, Jr., Gregory Malcolm Thompson, Roger Dariel Thompson, John Roy Teague, Randy Jean Totten, William Coy Turner, Richard Turner, Earl Ralph Turner, Jr., Sylvester George Tyler, Dale E. Umbenhauer, Kenneth Edward Van Hoy, Jesse Floyd Wages, David Lee Wagner, Michael Albert Wainwright, James Edward Walker, Gary Lane Walker, William E. Walters, Lewis Neal Welsh, Larry Joe West, Norman Philip Westwood, Jr., Jack Lee White, Arlos Clayton Wilder, Jimmy Laverne Williams, Edward Leon Wilmers, David Wayne Wilson, Raymond Charles Wood, Aaron Lee Wood, Arthur P. Wright, Wayne Gary Wutsky, Jose Yabanes, Charles Luther Young, Stephen Rogers Young.